next, I would like to introduce Larry Whitner, who's going to be talking a little bit more about the TPNW, or Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons itself. Larry Whitner is a professor of history emeritus at SUNY Albany, a former president of the Peace History Society, a current board member of the Peace Action Fund of New York State, and the author of Confronting the Bomb and many other works on nuclear disarmament issues, as Diane referenced earlier. So with that, Larry, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you. Will the world ever be free of the menace of nuclear annihilation? As David mentioned, there was a promising start along these lines during the late 20th century, when, pressed by a powerful movement against nuclear weapons, the nations of the world adopted a succession of nuclear arms control and disarmament agreements. But the tide gradually turned during the final years of the 20th century and the first decades of the 21st. As international conflict heightened and the nuclear disarmament movement waned, the nuclear arms race resumed. Deeply disturbed by the slide toward disaster, the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, comprised of hundreds of organizations, teamed up with the governments of many of the world's non-nuclear nations to foster a series of UN conferences focused on the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. Eventually, a UN conference with representatives from some 130 governments and dozens of civil society organizations met in March 2017 and began negotiations for a treaty outlawing nuclear weapons. In July of that year, the delegates adopted a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, TPNW, by a vote of 122 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstaining. The treaty banned the use, threatened use, development, manufacture, acquisition, possession, stockpiling, stationing, and installation of nuclear weapons. Following its ratification by the requisite 50 nations, this landmark agreement went into force on January 22nd, 2021. A serious problem remained, though, for the 9 nuclear weapons nations, Russia, the United States, China, Britain, France, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea, were determined to sabotage the TPNW. All of them boycotted the treaty negotiations, as did many of their allies. On the first day of negotiations, Nikki Haley, U.S. ambassador to the UN during the Trump presidency, hosted a press conference outside the negotiations room that sharply criticized pursuit of a treaty. As the treaty neared the necessary ratifications for implementation, the Trump administration urged nations to rescind their ratifications. Meanwhile, at international gatherings, the governments of China, France, Russia, Britain, and the United States issued joint statements disparaging the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Most tellingly, none of the nuclear powers signed or ratified the treaty. This rejectionist stance meant that although the treaty had a symbolic significance, the nuclear powers snubbing the international agreement would continue their nuclear buildups as they prepared for nuclear war. Even so, public agitation for the TPNW was far from dead. Although the campaign to ban nuclear weapons didn't blossom into an enormous mass movement, as there had been during the 1980s, it had sufficient strength to press the issue. ICAN, which won the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize for its treaty leadership, launched a cities appeal that led hundreds of cities, local and regional bodies all over the world to speak out in support of the TPNW. They included Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as Berlin, Paris, Sydney, Oslo, Geneva, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and New York City. In 2024, ICANN's campaign continued to advance. In Switzerland, it launched an alliance of organizations to establish a popular vote on joining the TPNW. Gathering momentum, its cities appeal reached over 100 cities each in Spain and in Italy, including Rome. Campaigners from around the world engaged in a week of action, sponsoring rallies, signature drives, teach-ins, social media collaborations, webinars, protests at banks, and media campaigns. ICANN published a report on the annual $91.4 billion in nuclear weapons spending by the nuclear powers, generating news coverage in some of the major communications media of the rejectionist nations, including ABC, NBC, Washington Post, NPR, The Guardian, The Times, Radio France, Le Figaro, and BFM TV. In the United States, the campaign made some small but significant progress. In April 2019, Representatives James McGovern and Earl Blumenauer introduced a House resolution calling for the United States to embrace the goals and provisions of the TPNW. Furthermore, when the U.S. Conference of Mayors, representing 1,400 U.S. cities, met in August 2021, the gathering unanimously passed a resolution praising the treaty. In December of that year, the New York City Council adopted a resolution instructing the city controller to remove investments by the city's $250 billion pension fund in companies producing or maintaining nuclear weapons. And in January 2023, McGovern introduced another House resolution to embrace the goals and provisions of the TPNW. By 2024, it had 44 co-sponsors. And as Diane has just mentioned, a new version is being introduced in the new Congress. Opinion surveys found a high level of support for the TPNW in numerous countries that had resisted signing it, including Finland, 84% support, Australia, 79%, Sweden, 79%, Norway, 78%, Japan, 75%, Italy, 70%, Germany, 68%, France, 67%, the United States, 65%, and Belgium, 64%. Meanwhile, nations continue to join the TPNW. As of today, 94 countries, half the nations of the world, have signed the treaty, and 73 have followed up thus far by ratifying it. Yet the nuclear powers are still not among them, for they remain stubbornly committed to maintaining their nuclear arsenals and opposing the treaty. And while they remain outside the TPNW, the treaty will not end the nuclear menace. Given the weapons obsession of a small group of nations, including our own, the short-term prospect for an effective ban on nuclear weapons is bleak. But longer term, the revival of a massive anti-nuclear movement, combined with pressure from an empowered United Nations, could bring the nuclear holdouts into the treaty and thereby avert nuclear catastrophe. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Larry, for that great overview. Next, last of our speakers, but certainly not least, is Rishi Gurudevan, or David. Rishi is the founder of Students for Nuclear Disarmament, which is a national nonpartisan 501(c)(3) dedicated to raising awareness among Gen Z about nuclear war. And he's also a senior at Phillips Exeter Academy. So, Rishi, please.
Thank you so much for that intro, Emily, and thank you so much to my fellow panelists. There's been so much, empowering stuff said, and it really fills me with hope that all of you are on this call right now. Like someone like Professor Courtwright, I think, said previously, your very presence being here is proof that people can sort of care about this work. So as Emily mentioned, I'm a senior in high school. I'm 17 years old and I'm the founder of Students for Nuclear Disarmament. And I want to tell you a little bit today about how I came to be involved in this work, what made me care about nuclear weapons in the first place, to sort of like present a model for how we can get more young people to care about nuclear weapons, and then talk about a little bit about what Students for Nuclear Disarmament does, and how you can help us out. So 2 years ago, I didn't care about nuclear weapons. I'll be completely honest. I had no idea about the sort of risks and how close we are to the brink of nuclear war. I dabbled in high school debate as a freshman. I don't really do it anymore. But nuclear war is often seen as the worst impact of any sort of terrible thing happening. The worst thing that can happen due to a sequence of events, you logically link the chain to nuclear war, and it's just portrayed as that is the worst thing that can happen. But no one really talks about what a nuclear war actually looks like, right? The scale of destruction, the scale of humanitarian suffering, and not only the destruction from the blasts themselves, but the impacts on global supply chain, the causing of nuclear famine, the potential for nuclear winter, and things like that. This destruction is never realized for people. And I think that's a big reason why my generation, especially, has fallen under a false sense of security. So about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years now, a speaker from the back from the Brink Campaign, one of the co-founders, came to my high school and gave a talk about. He's a doctor, and he gave a talk about the medical consequences of nuclear war. Um, to put it simply, it was horrifying. It was a horrifying 45 minutes to sit through. It was really scary. I, felt my heart, as Diane said, she shivers when she hears some of this stuff. My reaction is exactly the same. To hear about just one nuclear weapon being dropped over my home city of New York, and all the way to hearing about the full scale impacts of a nuclear war between Russia and the United States, which physicians estimate could yield 5 billion deaths. I was completely scared out of my mind. Um, but the speaker also talked about, as mentioned before, how much of a human problem this is, how much that nuclear weapons are not a fact of nature. They're something that we humans created ourselves and equally have the capacity to dismantle and get rid of. As I think has been mentioned so far, at the peak of the Cold War, there were 80,000 nuclear warheads in the world, and now there are only 12,000. So we've definitely made a lot of progress on this issue, an issue that we've created for ourselves. At first, I didn't really know what to do with the information. I'd heard, about this campaign called the Back from the Brink campaign. There didn't seem at that time to be a large youth component to it. And I didn't really know what to do with all that information. So fast forward a few months, the capstone of our U.S. history curriculum at my school is a 20-page research paper. I know it sounds terrible, a 20-page research paper on any topic of our choosing. And it just so happens that we had a really vivid unit about the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is, one of the closest times, our close calls to the brink of nuclear war. And I was really inspired. I was really scared by that incident. And also inspired by that speaker who told me so much about nuclear weapons. And so I decided, as has been mentioned a couple of times, to research the nuclear freeze movement for my paper. And that really served as the inspiration for all the action that I do today. And I know we've talked about it a little bit already, so I won't, read out anything. But the thing that stood out to me most about the nuclear freeze movement is I'm based in a small town in New Hampshire right now. It's a town of about 5,000 people. And the nuclear freeze movement started in a town not too dissimilar from my own, the one that I go to school in. It started as a few New England towns declaring themselves nuclear weapons free zones. It built up from just a couple in Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts, in Western Massachusetts, and then grew to a million-person protest in Central Park, and resulted in, as I argued in that history paper, Reagan and Gorbachev signing the INF Treaty, which was the greatest nuclear arms reduction in the history of the world and ended the Cold War. And it really demonstrated to me that young people, that a movement was in big part driven by students, really can make an impact. But we also see this principle today, which is what led me to found Students for Nuclear Disarmament. Young people have had an impact on massive social movements throughout history. From the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Day was earlier this week. The Civil Rights Movement was driven by students and young people marching to make a change. All the way fast forward to today, people like Greta Thunberg that we've seen in the news have transformed the climate movement from somewhat of a fringe, um, idea to something that policymakers take seriously. And we saw historical investments in climate infrastructure in the previous administration. All that to say is that I really did believe at this point that young people did have a role to play in preventing nuclear war. And so, together with a few friends, I decided to found Students for Nuclear Disarmament, a national nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness among my generation who hasn't lived through Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or really any of the Cold War at all. We're not aware about the issue largely. So raising awareness among my generation about the nuclear threat, but not only that, providing a mechanism for us to take action and encourage the U.S. government to pursue a set of common sense nuclear weapons policies. And in coordination with the Back from the Brink campaign, we've had immense success. It started as just a club at my high school, and then I got in contact with someone in California, and we've grown all the way to a network of 12 states, chapters in 12 at colleges and high schools and colleges in 12 states. And it's really filled me with optimism that young people really can care about this issue if we try. So we do this through our organizing looks like takes shape in a bunch of ways. Our high school clubs bring speakers like my illustrious colleagues on this panel to talk about issues among to students, just like the man who talked to me originally and raise awareness among them. We started a bunch of petitions, getting high school students to sign on, asking their congressman to sign on to the Back from the Brink campaign. We had an entirely student-run effort in the city of Burbank, California last year, 2 years ago, sorry, which was a city of over 100,000 people. That resulted in the mayor of that city issuing a proclamation in support of nuclear abolition, completely run by high school students. And lucky for us, people are actually starting to pay attention to what we're doing. It was really exciting this past week when the New York Times reached out to us and did an interview with a few of our members. They're writing an article now to follow up to their Back at the Brink series on nuclear weapons and the next generation. So not only have young people started to, wake up to this threat, but people have started to wake up to the fact that we are a force for change. So in terms of our goals for this coming year, we have a sort of numerical goal of 20 active chapters at high schools and colleges across the country. We're sitting at about 15 active and semi-active ones right now. But more importantly, we want to make significant progress on inserting nuclear weapons into the political zeitgeist again among young people like it was in the 1980s. The biggest issue right now is that people don't talk about nukes. I had no idea about this issue until someone came and told me. And we want to change that, and we're making progress on that every week. But most importantly, we want people to not lose hope, especially with a new administration coming in, which has a very pro-nuclear weapons posture. Like Professor Whitner and Diane and Professor Courtwright said, the nuclear freeze movement originated in a conservative Republican administration, which was very pro-defense in its first term. And after a bunch of activists gathered together and said, we want to change this, change their minds. So that's a bunch of our goals and sort of our operations. And I'd love to answer any questions later. But in terms of how students can specifically get involved, I'm going to paste a few links in the chat for you to get more information. The first is this membership form, which is super low commitment. So any student can just hop on our email list and receive weekly opportunities to get involved in anti-nuclear activism. And then in terms of if anyone's interested in on the call or knows any students who are interested in starting a chapter at their school, please reach out to us at students. I'm pasting this email in the chat as well. We recently hired a part-time outreach director who's really coordinating our outreach on a larger scale and really excited to do to talk to any young people or any not young people who are interested in connecting us with young people to grow our movement. So thank you so much, and I think it's Q&A time. The student, yes, absolutely. Please do share the chapter, the sign up form to any avenues that you guys see fit.
Great. Thank you so much, Rishi, for that great presentation. With that, we'll now turn to Q&A. So I'm seeing questions coming in already. And I'd like to thank you, Tara. I think Tara is helping me pin our speakers so we have everyone up on deck. I'm seeing the first question for you, Rishi. How many are in your group? It's exciting that young people are working on this very important issue. And thank you, we need you. So yeah, how many people?
I think so. We've estimated recently a little over 100 volunteers in total across the country. Those are like ones who've registered with us officially. But in terms of like our reach in general, I think it's in the thousands in terms of total like social media impressions. People who have attended our events similar to these. But in terms of active like volunteers who are actively organizing, it's a little over in the 3 digits, I think.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing those numbers. We love to hear it, and hope you get to those 20 chapters this year. The next question is, and sorry folks, it's a little hard to read and moderate at the same time, but this is a question from James Wagner, or Jim. This question's for you, David Courtwright. Given the rapid deterioration in the global nuclear arms control regime, in February 2026, isn't a global nuclear freeze our best chance at this point? There's a lot more to it in the chat, but I'll start with that, and you can read the rest of the background if you need in the chat. But global nuclear freeze, what do you think?
Yes, I think it's an idea. Several of us have been talking about it, but I think in terms of the global arms reduction regime falling apart, the big priority is to try to extend, if possible, renegotiate and strengthen the New START treaty. And that deadline for expiration is next year. So it's a little over 12 months from now, I believe. So that's the big priority on arms control structures. I think a global freeze campaign of some sort might make sense. I mean, there's several of us have been talking about it. Like I said at the end of my remarks, just say no more nuclear weapons, no more testing, no use, and try to see if this kind of a concept could catch on and begin to attract support from not only many of us as activists, but others in the broader society. I do think it's important, though, to hold on to the vision of the TPNW. I think the Back from the Brink program is comprehensive and important to include as we campaign on any specific goal. But yeah, I think history can't be repeated exactly, but the freeze was this kind of simple idea, and people latched onto it, and it really catalyzed a lot of action. I remember it saying that our board of directors did not like the freeze because we wanted to be campaigning for complete nuclear disarmament. But we worked on it nonetheless and still tried to keep with the disarmament agenda and other issues that we were dealing with. So the freeze became a kind of a vehicle that everybody could use and everybody sort of benefited from. So, and it doesn't need to be a big campaign. And in fact, the freeze campaign, as you remember, was not a big organization. And the office was called a clearinghouse, and the staff was just a few people. And it was this incredible grassroots network in many states and hundreds of communities. And it got together once a year to try to set priorities. But so I think not competing with good groups like Back from the Brink and the Arms Control Association and ICANN and other groups is important. But perhaps some kind of a vehicle to work together on a specific appeal might be a worthwhile thing. I mean, for that to happen, we need lots of people on the discussion, maybe have a larger in-person meeting. I recall that when the freeze began, there was a meeting that Randall Forsberg, our initiator, convened at Georgetown University. And to everyone's surprise, hundreds of people came, and the decision was made, well, let's launch this campaign. It was already beginning, but took off organizationally after that. But yeah, I think it's worth discussing, but doing it, as I say, a process that has Back from the Brink at the center of it, because I think they're one of the strongest groups for the best grassroots a network and the hubs, as Diane was mentioning, but can also think about what are some near-term kinds of goals and initiatives that might build broader support.
Great, thanks, David. There was also an earlier question, I'm not sure if you or Larry wants to answer it, about North Korea and how close you think North Korea is to developing a bomb.
Well, I can say that North Korea has developed the bomb, and it has the missiles to carry it. I believe the question in the chat though referred to the H bomb, and I'm not quite sure how to answer that one. David, do you have an answer to that?
I don't know. I haven't heard of that. I doubt that it's near-term horizon for the North Koreans, but the fact that they have 50 already and ballistic missiles to deliver them is scary enough. So,
Yes, agreed. Any amount is alarming, for sure.